131 days. That number sits with you differently depending on who you are. If you are a detective, it means paperwork, leads gone cold, a whiteboard that used to be covered in arrows and names and is now half erased. If you are a journalist, it means the story has drifted from the front page to somewhere buried, somewhere people scroll past. But if you are the family of Nancy Guthrie, 131 days means something else entirely. It means 131 mornings of waking up and not knowing. 131 nights of going to sleep with the same hollow feeling in your chest that was there when you woke up. And the cruelest part of that number is that it keeps growing. It does not stop at 131. It will be 132 tomorrow and 133 the day after, and the world largely will not notice because the world has moved on to other tragedies, other headlines, other names. But something happened this week that cracked the silence open. And it did not come from where anyone expected. It did not come from the FBI field office in Arizona. It did not come from the Pima County Sheriff's Department. It did not come from any of the task forces or federal agencies or law enforcement bodies that have the resources, the mandate, and frankly the obligation to find Nancy Guthrie. It came from a group of mothers in Mexico. Let that settle for a moment. A group of mothers. Women who formed an organization not because someone paid them to, not because they wear a badge, not because solving crimes is their 9 to 5, but because they have personally felt what it means to have someone you love disappear into silence and never come back. They called themselves Buscando Corazones Nogales, searching for hearts. And that name alone tells you everything you need to know about who these women are and why they do what they do. They received a tip, not a vague feeling. Not a rumor passed through 3 different people until the original information was unrecognizable. A specific tip, with details. Details specific enough that this group of volunteer mothers packed up and went to an area called Mariposa, which translates to butterfly in English, southwest of Nogales, and began searching the ground for what they had been told might be the remains of an American woman who went missing from her home in Tucson more than 4 months ago. And they did not go alone. The Sonora State Commission for the Search of Missing Persons backed them. Municipal officials backed them. State officials sent security personnel to keep these volunteers safe while they walked what amounts to some of the most dangerous and haunted ground in that entire region. Because this area, this Mariposa area, is not just any patch of desert scrubland. This group has previously found 25 unmarked graves there. 25 in one general area. That is not a coincidence of geography. That is a deliberate choice made repeatedly by people who know that ground and trust it to keep their secrets. Now think about what that means in context of Nancy Guthrie. From her home in Tucson to that area near Nogales is roughly 60 to 70 miles. Depending on traffic and how you cross, that is somewhere between an hour and 2 hours of driving. That is not a cross-country odyssey. That is a Sunday afternoon drive. The border crossing at Nogales is notoriously, almost embarrassingly, easy to navigate. A journalist from News Nation crossed it simply to demonstrate how porous it was and came back in time to file his evening report. No documents required. No real scrutiny of what or who was going southbound. Everything coming north gets x-rayed, inspected, questioned. But traffic heading south into Mexico moves with almost no friction at all. Which means if someone wanted to take something or someone across that border without attracting attention, they would face almost no obstacle in doing it. So the question that has been nagging at people close to this story from nearly the very beginning now has a sharper, more urgent form. Was this considered? Was the possibility that Nancy Guthrie was taken south of that border into an area where a killing field already exists, where law enforcement presence is thin and jurisdictional reach from American authorities is essentially non-existent? Was that possibility genuinely pursued with the same intensity as everything north of the border? And the answer, based on what we now know, is deeply uncomfortable. Because the Pima County Sheriff's Department, when asked about this search in Mexico, about this tip, about this organized effort backed by Mexican government officials in the Sonora state, released a statement saying they had not been contacted by Mexican authorities. That was the statement. We were not contacted. There was no follow-up sentence saying, but we immediately reached out. There was no indication of any outreach going the other direction, just a passive acknowledgement that no one had called them. This is where the frustration becomes legitimate and not just emotional. Because in any investigation involving a missing person where the evidence suggests a possible cross-border element, the standard of practice is not to wait for the other country to call you. You call them. You establish lines of communication. You build relationships with the relevant agencies. You keep those channels open even if they go quiet for weeks, because the moment something moves, you need to be able to act on it immediately. What appears to have happened here, instead, is a kind of investigative paralysis at the border. Two countries, 60 or 70 miles apart, working completely separately on what is arguably the same problem. And a volunteer group of Mexican mothers had to close that gap themselves because no one with a badge and a budget was apparently doing it. To understand why this matters beyond the immediate outrage of it, you have to understand what happens to an investigation over time. In the early days of a case like this, the intensity is extraordinary. Task forces are assembled. Federal resources are committed. Tips are flooding in by the thousands. Media coverage is wall to wall. Every lead gets chased down with urgency because everyone believes the breakthrough is just around the corner. And then the weeks pass, and the tips slow down, and the task force, which was never designed to sustain itself at that original level indefinitely, begins to quietly contract. People get reassigned. Other cases demand attention. The whiteboard gets half erased. The urgency never disappears entirely, but the resources do, gradually, almost invisibly, until what was once a multi-agency federal operation has become maybe one or two dedicated investigators who are also carrying caseloads for a dozen other things. This is not a failure unique to this case. It is the structural reality of law enforcement in a country with finite resources and an infinite supply of crime. But knowing it is structural does not make it less painful when it is happening to someone you love. What the passage of 131 days does, though, is interesting in ways that are not all negative. Time is a strange thing in criminal investigations. In the beginning, time is the enemy. Evidence degrades. Witnesses forget. Crime scenes get contaminated or washed away. Every hour that passes without an arrest is another hour that physical proof of what happened is disappearing. But at a certain point, something shifts. People who were afraid to talk begin to feel like maybe the danger has passed. Associates of whoever did this start to feel the pressure of carrying a secret that heavy for that long. The person who committed this crime, if they're still walking around free, has almost certainly begun to feel a growing sense of confidence that they got away with it. And that confidence changes behavior. People talk more when they feel safe. They brag, subtly or not so subtly. They say things in the wrong company. They drink too much one night and let something slip to someone who files it away and then calls in a tip 4 months later with enough specific detail to send a group of volunteers to a butterfly-named stretch of ground in Sonora looking for an American grandmother. The network of people who know something in a case like this is never just one person. Whoever did this to Nancy Guthrie operated within a social world. They have contacts, associates, maybe accomplices, maybe just people who heard things and looked the other way. And every single one of those people is a potential point of failure for whoever is trying to keep the secret. The first one to talk almost always gets the best deal. That is not just street wisdom. That is documented practice in criminal investigations going back decades. The moment the network starts to feel any kind of internal pressure, whether it is financial, legal, interpersonal, any kind of tension at all, the race to the authorities begins. And the reward money attached to this case, which is substantial, creates its own very particular kind of gravity on that network. It pulls on the people who know things. It makes staying silent feel increasingly expensive in a very concrete way. Which is why what is happening in Nogales right now, even though the search came up empty on the first attempt, is not a dead end. It is a signal. It is a signal that information is moving through channels that are separate from official law enforcement, through communities and networks that operate on different frequencies than the FBI. Someone in or around Nogales heard or saw something specific enough to put a location on it. specific enough that a credible organization with a proven track record of finding things other people could not find took it seriously enough to mobilize. And the Mexican government agreed with that assessment enough to provide both logistical and security support. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, quite a lot. It means the information that generated this tip has credibility that extends beyond one anonymous caller with an axe to grind or a fantasy to indulge. The area called Mariposa is now part of this story in a way it cannot simply be walked back from. 25 unmarked graves in one area represents a pattern of use by people who felt safe using it repeatedly. Patterns like that do not form accidentally. They form because someone knows the terrain, knows the risks, knows the likelihood of discovery, and has calculated that the odds are in their favor. For a person who committed a crime north of the border and needed a disposal site quickly and with some confidence, an area already established as exactly that kind of site would have a terrible practical appeal. The search is not over. The group has said so explicitly. They are going back, and every pass they make over that ground, every piece of it they cover, is either going to yield something or rule something out. Both of those outcomes have investigative value. What this moment really demands is a response from American authorities that matches the moment. Not a statement on social media noting that no one has called them. A phone call, an email, a plane ticket, and a meeting in Sonora with the people who are actively searching ground that may hold the answer to a question that Nancy Guthrie's family has been living with for 131 days. Cadaver dogs, resources, presence, the kind of show of commitment that tells everyone watching in both countries that this investigation is still alive and still being pursued with the urgency it deserves. The mothers of Buscando Corazones Nogales did not have to do any of this. They have no legal obligation to care about an American woman from Tucson. They do it because they understand, at a level that is both professional and deeply personal, what it means to search for someone. They do it because they know what that family is living through. They do it because the act of looking is itself a form of insisting that the missing person still matters. And right now, they are the ones doing the looking. The least the American side of this investigation can do is pick up the phone and offer to help. 131 days. The number keeps growing. But so does the information. And somewhere in the gap between those two things, there is still the possibility of an answer.